Harmony Fields was the kind of town that felt like it had been plucked straight from an old painting, quaint, peaceful, the kind of place where you knew every face by name and where the days were marked by the steady rhythm of the seasons. The soil here, they said, was blessed. It was rich and dark, the kind you could sink your hands into and feel life pulsing through your fingers. Every year, the crops grew tall and strong, feeding not just the town but its spirit. When the air turned crisp and the leaves began their slow shift to amber and gold, the entire town would come alive in anticipation of the harvest. That was what Harmony Fields was known for, the Harvest Festival. Every fall, the streets would fill with laughter and music, stalls would line the square, and the smell of freshly baked bread and roasted corn would linger in the air. It was a time of celebration, a time to give thanks for the land's bounty. I had lived here my entire life. I knew every field, every stone, every shadow that stretched across the earth as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills. And yet, even after all these years, there was something different about this place. Something that felt older than the land itself. It was in the way the wind sometimes whispered through the trees, as though carrying secrets from long ago, secrets no one dared to speak aloud. This year, the excitement for the Harvest Festival was like nothing I had ever seen before. The crops had grown thicker, taller, greener than they had in decades. People swore it was the best yield in generations, almost as if the earth had given everything it had. The townsfolk couldn't stop talking about it. Every conversation was filled with predictions of how the festival would outshine all those that came before it. Families spent their days baking pies, canning preserves, and crafting decorations. In the town square, children ran around, laughing and chasing each other while the grown-ups strung up lights, banners, and corn husks in bright patterns. The scent of cinnamon and clove drifted through the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of ripened fruit and freshly cut hay. Everyone seemed to be smiling, as if the land itself was giving back to us tenfold. I walked through the fields that week, feeling the stalks of wheat brush against my fingertips, watching the way the sun shimmered off the rows of crops like a golden sea. It felt alive, more alive than ever before. There was a pulse to it, something electric. I could almost hear it beneath the surface, a hum, faint but constant, as if the earth was breathing with us, ready to celebrate alongside us. But with all the joy, I couldn't shake a creeping unease. Something in the back of my mind whispered that maybe it was too much, that maybe the land had given more than it was supposed to. But I brushed it aside. The festival was just days away, and it was set to be the biggest celebration Harmony Fields had ever seen. What could possibly go wrong? It started with just a single row of corn. I remember it clearly, an entire field, healthy and towering, and then, overnight, one row withered. The stalks, which had stood tall and proud the day before, had turned brown, crumbling into brittle husks. At first, no one thought much of it. Crops die sometimes, it happens. But the next night, 2 more rows followed. Then 3. Within a week, the golden fields that had promised such a bountiful harvest had begun to rot before our eyes. Stalks of wheat, once strong and straight, bent under their own weight, their grains shriveled and blackened. The pumpkins, which had grown large and round, were now sunken and discolored, the vines surrounding them twisted like something unnatural had taken root. The smell, God, the smell. It was as if the earth itself had turned sour, like something was festering beneath the surface. People began to whisper. Farmers stared at their land with hollow eyes, hands on their hips, shaking their heads as if they could will the crops back to life. But the blight spread faster than anyone could comprehend. No matter what they tried, extra water, special fertilizers, desperate prayers to gods they hadn't spoken to in years, nothing stopped the decay. It wasn't long before the livestock started acting strange. Cows wouldn't graze near the fields anymore, and the chickens stopped laying eggs. They huddled together at the edges of their pens, their eyes wide, as if they could sense something we couldn't. And it was in the silence, the unsettling quiet that fell over the town, that the first signs of fear began to creep into our hearts. It wasn't just the crops. It was the land itself. Something was wrong, something far beyond a bad season or a simple blight. Something was feeding. We just didn't know it yet. Panic came slowly at first, like a shadow creeping across the town, unnoticed until it was too late. People began locking their doors at night, though no one would admit what they were afraid of. Farmers stayed out in their fields long after sundown, staring at the dying crops, their eyes hollow, as if waiting for some kind of answer to emerge from the soil. The once bustling town square, where kids used to laugh and chase each other, fell silent. No one had the heart to decorate anymore. I remember walking through the streets one evening, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting everything in a strange, burnt orange light. It felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. I saw Old Man Darby, the oldest farmer in Harmony Fields, standing at the edge of his property, staring at what was left of his wheat. His hands were shaking, his lips moving as if he were talking to someone or something. When I asked him what was wrong, he just stared at me with those sunken eyes and muttered, "It's taking it all back." By now, it wasn't just the crops. People were changing to. Sarah, the baker's wife, was the first to fall ill. Her skin grew pale and blotchy, her once lively eyes now dull and sunken. She complained of a deep, gnawing fatigue, like something was draining the life right out of her. Within days, others started showing the same signs: weakness, sickness, a slow deterioration that no doctor could explain. The town held a meeting in the church one evening, hoping to make sense of what was happening. The room was packed, every face pale with fear. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and decay, a combination that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Murmurs filled the space as people exchanged theories. Some said it was a curse, others blamed the weather, a few claimed it was a punishment from God for letting the festival become too grand, too proud. But no one had answers. And as I sat there watching the faces around me, I could feel it, the fear spreading, festering, just like the rot in the fields. It clung to us, heavy and thick, choking the air out of the room. And that's when the rumors began. Whispers of something old, something buried deep beneath the land, something that had been awakened, something hungry. We were desperate. The crops were beyond saving, the livestock sickly, and now, even the people were wasting away. It felt as though the town was being drained, as if something invisible was siphoning the life out of everything. So we did what desperate people do. We searched for answers in places we hadn't dared to look before. It started with the elders. They began speaking in hushed tones about old stories, whispers of a time long before Harmony Fields was even a thought on the map. Stories that had been buried, much like whatever was beneath the soil. It was the kind of thing they used to tell around the fire to scare kids into behaving, but now, those stories had a weight to them, a truth no one wanted to admit. I remember Mrs. Calloway, the oldest living resident, wringing her hands nervously as she told us what she remembered. "The land wasn't always ours," she said, her voice trembling. "Long ago, it belonged to something else, something ancient. My grandmother used to say that before the settlers came, the ground was sacred, but not to us. It was a place of offerings, sacrifices." The room grew colder with every word she spoke. I felt it then, a tightening in my chest, a slow dread creeping in as the pieces began to fall into place. We had always thought of the land as a gift, something that gave to us generously year after year. But maybe it wasn't a gift. Maybe it was an agreement that had been broken. That night, a few of us went to the archives hoping to find more, hoping this was just some superstitious nonsense. We searched through old ledgers, maps, and forgotten records until we stumbled upon it. A document, yellowed with age, from the original settlers. The handwriting was faded, but the words chilled me to my core. It spoke of a pact made with the land, a promise to never disturb what lay beneath. And in exchange, the land would remain fertile, abundant. But the settlers had marked one rule in bold, scratched deep into the paper, as though to warn anyone who dared break it. Never dig too deep. We had broken that rule. In our eagerness for a bigger harvest, we plowed the fields deeper than we ever had before. And in doing so, we had awakened something. Something that had been resting, waiting, and now it wanted what was promised. The others wanted to believe it was just coincidence, a fable spun out of fear, but deep down, I knew. I could feel it in my bones, like a cold hand tightening around my heart. Something had been disturbed, something ancient and ravenous. And now, it was coming for all of us. The truth came out slowly, like a wound festering beneath the surface. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late to stop it. We had awakened something that no one fully understood, something older than the town, older than the very soil we had taken for granted. It was Ezekiel, the town's gravedigger, who first saw it with his own eyes. One night, after days of sleeplessness, he wandered the fields, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain. He told us later that the earth didn't feel right under his boots. The pulsed. He swore the ground breathed, like something just beneath it was shifting, stirring. And then he saw it, at the far end of the field, where the land dipped low, a figure. He described it as a shadow at first, tall, thin, and almost human, but not quite. Its limbs were too long, its body too stretched, and it seemed to move with a slithering grace, as if it wasn't walking, but gliding over the ground. Ezekiel said the figure bent down, placing its hand on the earth, and with each touch, the crops around it withered and died, the life sucked out of them in an instant. He ran, breathless and wild-eyed, but not before he caught a glimpse of its face, or what he thought was a face. Hollow, empty, and hungry, as though the darkness itself had been given form. When he told us, no one wanted to believe him. No one could. But deep down we knew. We all had felt it, hadn't we? The pull of the land, the way it seemed to draw energy from everything around it. The way our bodies felt weaker with each passing day. The land wasn't just dying, it was being consumed. And whatever was doing the consuming was growing stronger. We pieced together the rest through hurried whispers, old journals, and fevered memories. The settlers hadn't just made a pact with the land, they had bound something to it, something they couldn't control. Some ancient entity, neither man nor beast, a force of hunger that had been sealed beneath the fields. And when we plowed deeper, in our greed, we had broken that seal. It was feeding now, not just on the crops, but on us. Every breath we took, every step we made on the dying soil, it grew closer, feeding on our energy, our very lives. The sickness spreading through the town wasn't a disease, it was the land's curse. A slow drain, pulling the vitality from each of us, one by one. We tried to stop it, of course. We set up wards, lit candles, and called on priests from neighboring towns. But nothing worked. Nothing could reverse what had been done. The land was too far gone, and so were we. We had disturbed something that could never be put back to sleep. I can feel it now, deep beneath my skin. It started as a slight numbness in my fingertips, then a twinge in my legs, as though the earth itself was pulling at me, draining me slowly, feeding on what little life I had left. It's not just me. I've seen it in the others, how their faces have grown hollow, their skin pale and paper-thin, their movements sluggish like they're wading through invisible mud. It's taken hold of us all. The fields are dead now. Everything is. The crops have withered to nothing but dust, blown away by the autumn wind. The livestock, those that survived long enough to make it through the early days, have all collapsed, their eyes glazed over, their bodies twisted as if something had pulled the life out of them, inch by inch. The air is thick with rot, a stench so heavy that it clings to everything, fills your lungs, and never leaves. It's like the town itself is dying, like the land is swallowing us whole. We tried to fight it. We tried to leave, but the further you get from Harmony Fields, the weaker you become. Some of the younger folks packed up their things, determined to escape whatever was happening here. None of them made it past the ridge. They collapsed on the road, their bodies frail and thin, like they had aged 50 years in a single night. The land wouldn't let them go. It wants us here. It needs us here. I think the truth is that we were never just farming this land. We were feeding it. All this time, every harvest, every year, it took a little more from us than we realized. We thought we were blessed, thought we were lucky to live on soil so rich, so abundant. But the truth is, we've been paying a price. We just didn't know it until it was too late. The entity, whatever it is, it's not satisfied with just the crops anymore. It's hungry, ravenous for something deeper, something more. And now that the land is barren, it's turned its gaze on us. I can feel it pulling, tugging at my insides, like roots creeping through my veins, curling around my heart, my lungs, draining me bit by bit. I know what's coming. We all do. The others, they've stopped talking, stopped fighting. They sit in their homes, staring out at the dead fields, waiting. We're all just waiting now. For the end, for the moment when it finally takes the last bit of life we have left. The festival won't come this year. It was never going to. The only thing that will come is the harvest, the final one. I wonder, when it's all over, will anyone even remember us? Or will Harmony Fields be just another patch of land, another forgotten place swallowed by the earth, waiting for the next town to come along and dig too deep? The land is still. Too still. I think I hear something deep, low, a rumble beneath my feet. It's almost soothing now, like a lullaby pulling me under. I close my eyes, and for the first time, I can't feel the fear anymore. The land always takes what it's owed. And this time, it's taking us.